Hello, in this video I'm going to talk to you about carbohydrates and nucleic acids, but I've got a little bit of an introduction for you first, talking about macromolecules. So organic compounds are compounds that contain carbon, and they're called organic. They're also called macromolecules. This is another name for them, macro, because they are large molecules. So we're going to talk a little bit about carbon, because carbon is found in all four of these molecules that we're going to talk about, two today and then two in the next video. Carbon can form covalent bonds with up to 4 other atoms or elements, and if you don't remember what a covalent bond is, you definitely need to review that. So carbon can usually form bonds with other carbon molecules or hydrogen or oxygen or nitrogen, and when it bonds with carbon it can make these really long carbon chains, and you'll see examples of that. So examples, I apologize, this is a little hard to see. This is CH4. This is methane. Methane is an organic compound that has hydrogens off of all 4 sides. So macromolecules, like I said before, macro means large. They are large organic molecules, and some are also called polymers. If you think about the prefix poly, it means many, and that means that a polymer has many repeating parts, and that'll become a little more clear as we go through this. So polymers are made up of smaller quote-unquote building blocks called monomers. The prefix mono means single. So these are the individual blocks that when put together in a repeating pattern, you get a macromolecule or a polymer. Examples of these that we're going to talk about, 2 of them we're going to talk about in this video. They're the first and the last, carbohydrates and nucleic acids. And then in the next video, we'll talk about lipids and proteins. And as you can see right here, this clarifies that lipids are not polymers. They're the only one of the 3 that are not polymers. Therefore, they also do not have monomers. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail the next time or on the next video. So let's talk about carbohydrates. If you look at the word carbohydrate, you can actually break the word apart. Carbo stands for carbon, and hydrate literally means water. So if you look at a molecule and want to find out if it's a carbohydrate, you can look at the ratio of carbons to hydrogens to oxygens. You should have 1 carbon for every 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen, approximately. It's a pretty good rule of thumb. So you would have a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of carbon to hydrogen to oxygen. Or you could say you have 1 carbon for every 1 H2O. It's a much easier way to remember it. So carbohydrates are sugar molecules. They contain, as we just said, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So if you remember the abbreviation CHO, the C is the carbon, H is hydrogen, O is oxygen. This is how these are represented, how these chemicals are represented. You would find them in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. A monomer of a carbohydrate, or that single unit of a carbohydrate, is called a monosaccharide. Mono meaning 1, saccharide meaning sugar. If you put a bunch of those monosaccharides together, you chemically bond them together and have a string of them, you end up with a polymer, or specifically for carbohydrates, you end up with a polysaccharide. There is one monomer that you are responsible for knowing and understanding. This monomer is a single sugar unit called glucose. The chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6. That means there's 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. And you can see if we divide each of these numbers by 6, we end up with a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. This is what the molecule looks like, and you don't have to memorize all of this, how it's put together. Just remember that glucose is a ring with 6 sides. And you need to memorize the formula C6H12O6. I oftentimes recommend that you remember CHO because those are the elements that are found, and then just put 6, 12, 6, and it makes it much easier, much less likely to make a mistake. So the polymer is called a polysaccharide. So if we take many of those monomers and link them together into one molecule, we would have a polysaccharide. There are several examples of that. There are starch, which is found in bread and potatoes. There's glycogen, which you and I and other animals will actually create glycogen, and it's stored in the liver, or we would find it in beef muscle. There's also cellulose, and that's what makes up the structure of a plant, for example, lettuce and corn. That's actually the carbohydrate that we cannot digest. So this is an example, or this is what a cellulose molecule, or what part of a cellulose molecule would look like. Notice it's a whole bunch of monomers of glucose all chemically bonded together. The other macromolecule I want to talk to you about in this video is our nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are the molecule that carries genetic information. So this is your DNA, and that's DNA is an example of a nucleic acid. Notice the Na, nucleic acid. Makes it a little easier to remember. Nucleic acids contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. If you remember CHON-P, right? If you remember CHON-P, those are the 5 elements that you would find in a nucleic acid. So if I gave you a formula, which I probably wouldn't for a nucleic acid, but if you saw a molecule of nucleic acid and you saw that it had phosphorus, then it would be a pretty good indicator that you're probably looking at a nucleic acid if it's a macromolecule. The monomer of a nucleic acid is a nucleotide. So this is the single unit that if we take a bunch of these single units, put them together, we would end up with a nucleic acid. The polymer, there are 2 types of polymers of nucleic acids. There's DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. That's where the D comes from. And there is also ribonucleic acid. Ribonucleic acid is abbreviated RNA. So as you can see in the picture, this is a nucleotide. Nucleotides are made of 3 parts. There's a phosphate, there's a 5-carbon sugar, and there's also a base. If you were to draw this, you could draw, if you drew a house with the sides of the house pushed in slightly, you'd have the sugar, and then what you can do is just draw a line off to this side and put a P, and draw a line off to this side and write the word base, and you'll have a wonderful picture of a single nucleotide. This is a monomer of a nucleic acid. You don't have you don't have to memorize all of this chemical formula, but the reason why I show you this is you can see here is the phosphorus, and here are nitrogens, and you can see there's carbons. Actually, you notice there are no C's anywhere, but anywhere where these lines intersect, where there's no label, these are all carbons. Same here, these are also carbons. So I said that there were 2 different types of nucleic acids, and they are DNA and RNA. There are 3 differences between DNA and RNA. So DNA, if you think about DNA is actually in what's called a double helix. If you took a ladder that was like this with the rungs across, and you took that ladder and you twisted it, that's what DNA would look like. So DNA has 2 strands. It's got the strand on one side, the strand on the other side. So the 2 sides of the ladder would be considered the strands. RNA only has 1. So if you cut a ladder in half, remove one side, that's basically what an RNA strand would look like. We said that in a nucleotide there is a sugar molecule. Well, the sugar in DNA is deoxyribose. That's why it's called DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. And in RNA, the type of sugar is ribose, and that's where the R comes from. Now there are bases. We said the nucleotides are made up of sugar, phosphates, and a base. And there are different types of bases depending on whether you're talking about DNA or RNA. In DNA, there's cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine. And they're actually written in this particular order on purpose. When you have two sides of this quote-unquote ladder for DNA, on this side the base is going to point towards the inside, and on this side the other base from the other side is going to point to the inside. If this one is cytosine, this one is guanine. If this one is adenine, then this one is thymine. And we abbreviate those just by using the first letters of each of those words, and we capitalize them. So cytosine bonds with guanine, and adenine bonds with thymine. And a goofy way to remember this is apples fall from trees, A-T, and cars park in garages. So that'll help you remember which one pairs with what. Now, in RNA, 3 of these are the same. So cytosine and guanine are still the same. They still bond with each other. And adenine is still the same. But there is no thymine in RNA. Instead, in RNA, there's something called uracil. And the way I remember this is I have 2 vowels that go together in RNA. So adenine and uracil go together, whereas in DNA, adenine and thymine go together. And that's it. Nope, it's not. That's right. I wanted to give you a picture of this. So you can see we've got a sugar here, and a phosphate here, and a sugar here, and a phosphate here, and a sugar here, and a phosphate here. And on the other side, we have the same thing. We have this sugar phosphate backbone. And in the middle, we have the bases. So notice on the left-hand side, we have guanine. So on the right-hand side, we would have to have cytosine. And if on the left side we have thymine, on the right-hand side we have to have adenine. So this is what I mean by a double strand. We've got this backbone on this side. We have a sugar phosphate backbone on one side, and we have a sugar phosphate backbone on the other side. Now, that's it for this particular video. And if you have any questions, let me know in class.